Okay. Lord, speak through me this evening. Move us forward on our journey with you through this service. Amen. So last week, I had a prepared sermon on the subject of early faith. This week, I have an unprepared sermon on the subject of growing faith. But for those who were here last week, you may have realised that I cut off kind of abruptly in the middle of what I was saying last week because I suddenly realised I was about to get into the next week's subject. And so that wasn't my job. So I am kind of going to continue, but I have no notes. So please bear with me. So last week I talked about early faith, both from the perspective of that innocent childhood acceptance of faith, but also from the perspective of that new relationship moment, the excitement, and talked about how that needed to be nourished and encouraged. And that's true. And I stand by that. And growing faith is that period just after that. If you look at the childhood analogy, it's the teenager and adolescence into early 20s, where you have some independence, some acceptance, but you question things in a different way. The world isn't quite as perfect as you thought it might have been. The things that you grew up having such certainty in are less certain. You now know that Father Christmas probably is not real, and that in fact it's parental instrument. You now understand that not everything your teachers and your parents have told you is the only way to look at the world. It's the time when we question and find our own feet and have to build new relationships with those people who historically were our guides. The relationship that you have at the end of your 20s with your parents is very different to the relationship you had with them when you were 10. Regardless of whether it is a good relationship or a bad relationship, it cannot continue to be in the same format that it was when you were 10. If you look at it in the context of the new exciting relationship that's early faith, when you fall in love with someone, after you fall in love with them and assuming your relationship gets past that stage of just being newly in love, then there is a period where you accept that they are not perfect. You accept that they will forget things. In my case, sometimes I get forgotten. You accept that those are the things that you still love this person through. But you also go through a period of challenging your relationship, of questioning whether it's the right thing to do, whether it should continue. At some point in that period, you will have a massive argument, and hopefully at the end of it decide that it's still worth carrying on. But that breaking point moment can happen. Because you will disagree, because believe it or not, no two people agree 100% of the time on everything. If you think that you do that with your significant other or your best friend, then something is missing in the level of depth of the relationship. And it's not about whether this is a significant other. This is true with friendships, this is true with every kind of relationship. You will reach a point where you challenge and disagree with each other, even if it's only about which sport is the best, or, as we discovered earlier, whether Britney Spears and the Spice Girls are an attraction or artists that performed at the end of the 70s and in the early 80s. So depending on where you were in the spectrum, determined who you knew about, let alone what you thought about them. Okay, almost all of us seem to know who Britney Spears is, and still the view is divided as to whether that's a good thing or not. We have that thing with our faith. If we are at the end of that period or we've moved past it at this point in time, we will still remember the period when our faith was less shiny than it had been. It was less exciting than it had been. And yet it was still real and true. It was still something that we wanted to have, that we valued, that relationship with God. That relationship, personally for me, it's a relationship with Jesus, and it works like a friendship. So sometimes I am pissed off with Jesus because things are not going how I think they should. And at other times I understand that that's how life is. And sometimes I kind of get to the point where I sit there and I think, really? Why do I believe in this? Why am I carrying forward? And then the following day something will happen and it just makes sense again. And I have those moments with my friendships. And I have those things with my husband. Because that's real life. And you have that check-in point and you make sure that you're working on the relationship. And we work on our faith in the same way. Growing faith is just that, it grows. Like a plant in the garden, and I'm a gardener. If you neglect it, it will not grow. If I ignore my tomato plants, I put the seeds in, I sort of remember to water them while they're seedlings, and then I pot them out. I'm quite good at that stage. But then, quite often, I get busy with work and I then forget all about them. Now, if I forget all about them, completely forget about them, then they will wither and die. The slugs and the caterpillars will eat them. And there will, unfortunately, be no tomatoes because they will never get to maturity. They have to go through that growing phase when they are vulnerable to all kinds of pests and things in my garden that I would rather not have. But since I have an organic garden, I'm stuck with them. We all have moments where we are vulnerable, where our trust in another person is vulnerable. And faith is a form of trust. Faith in another person is a way of saying, I trust you, I have faith in you. Having a faith in God is also a way of saying, I trust that God is there. You can't get proof that God is there. I'm a scientist, I know what empirical proof looks like. You can't prove God's existence, and you can't disprove it either. I did go through a phase of trying that at one point. So, I trust that God is there. I trust that God is there for me and has a view of my life and is guiding things, and that there are no mistakes, however hard things get. And that means there are good times and bad times, just like in any other relationship. And that faith has to grow to get to that point. Now, if it sounds like I've been talking circularly, that's probably because I have. Because actually, unlike a plant that grows from a seedling through to fruit and then dies, our faith is much more like a cycle. A bit like a cycle of a tree growth, where they grow at certain points in the year and then they don't grow for a bit, and then when they reach maturity, even then they're still growing. We go through cycles. We do go back to that early excited phase, and we do go back to that questioning, uncertain time. That time of real growth. It's when we're pushed outside our comfort zone. Even if we count ourselves to be mature Christians or mature people of faith, with a certainty and a confidence and a knowledge base that means we are able to encourage others and that we don't walk away from that. We still have periods of real growth in our faith, where something clicks and makes real sense, and we challenge it and we push it, and we are pushed into a space where we realize afterwards that we've come a long way. Personally, I can't remember not being a Christian. I I remember reading the Bible as a child. I remember very clearly the certainty with which I was sure I was ready to be confirmed. I was confirmed when I was 12 years old. I was absolutely sure I knew what I was doing, but I remember on many occasions as I went through my teens after that, and as I went through university, where I would have said to you, I've grown so much in my faith since then that my confirmation now seems too early. And I will say again, now, I have grown so much more in my faith in the last 5 years that I would say it's still valid again. And yet, I would also say that my faith has a maturity, because I don't believe we ever stop growing in ways that stretch us emotionally, spiritually, intellectually. I stopped growing in height in my teens. And mostly I don't grow sideways. But we do keep growing in other ways. And if we understand that and we support each other in it, we are the people who have the opportunity to show others how they can grow in faith. That accepting the truths as factual truths that they were provided with as teenagers is not what takes to grow and to be who God made us to be. We were not made to stand still. We were made to keep going. And if we spend time with new people, if we talk to people about what we think and believe and allow them to challenge us, we will continue to grow, and we will help them to grow in whatever their journey looks like. Around this room, we are not all in the same place. We are not all people who can count their Christianity back to the time they were a baby. Nor are we all necessarily certain that our Christianity looks the same way as anyone else's, or our faith in God, if we don't want to call ourselves Christians. What we are all sure of is that today we are in a different place to where we were a week ago. And if you had never thought about it like that, then I challenge you to think about how much you have grown in a week. How much have you changed your perspective on the world? What have you learnt that's new? And how does that apply to faith? Amen.